Hi there, it's Wendy Hernandez with Command the Courtroom. Welcome to another episode of our show. And once again, I'm excited to have with us Dr. Shannon Wilson and Nell Bowers. And they're going to help us with some concepts that people ask me about a lot. And they have the answers. So, Nell is a licensed psychologist, and Dr. Shannon is a licensed clinical psychologist. Together, they've worked with children, families, the courts, and child protective services for more than 55 years. They believe that visits between non custodial parents and their children, which need to be supervised and documented by a trained and neutral party, should take place in a natural environment. This allows for healthy interaction between parent and child while still providing sufficient structure and control. To this end, they created the Assurance Group. Dr. Shannon and Nell, thanks for coming back to the show.
We're
Hi.
glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you again. So, we had a really good conversation last time. And unfortunately, because we got to talking so much, we didn't cover all the areas that I originally wanted to cover. So, thank you for coming back. I'm glad that you're willing to come back and cover a couple of those areas. So, one of the areas, and I'm really fuzzy on the difference between one of these areas and what we talked about. So, I want to talk today about reunification counseling. Last time we talked about therapeutic, I think it was therapeutic visitation. Is that right? Am I phrasing it right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the first thing I want to know is what is reunification counseling? And then, secondly, how is that different than therapeutic visitation?
Reunification therapy is usually involved when there has been a long separation between the non-custodial parent and the child or children. That separation may have been because the parent was not interested in being involved. It could be because the court system kept the child and father separated for whatever reason, or the father was just absent, the mother was just absent. And so they need to have some time to heal in order to come together in a positive way.
And so, and let me ask you this, because I know that different states might use different terms. So here in Arizona, practitioners use a lot of the time the term therapeutic intervention, which I don't know if that is considered the same thing as therapeutic visitation. It's not, it's different. You're
Yes.
shaking your okay. So then can you then also distinguish for me the difference between reunification counseling and therapeutic intervention?
Yeah, I think that would depend on how they're using therapeutic intervention. What are they talking about when they use that phrase?
Yeah, so I mean, commonly I think that I hear judges and mental health practitioners talk about therapeutic intervention when the relationships between children and parents need to be, quote, healed, or, that bond needs to be repaired. So, for example, in a case like Nell, you were just talking about a case where parents and children have been separated for a long time. Is it possible that they might benefit from both reunification counseling and therapeutic intervention, or is it a one or the other type thing, or does it depend?
Therapeutic intervention implies that there is a therapist who will intervene in the interaction between the parent and the child, which for us would take place during the process of a supervised visitation. So it would be both supervised and interactive, where the therapist intervenes and kind of guides the conversation if need be and makes suggestions more so that the visit can be more positive and have a better outcome. The reunification usually takes place very differently. It takes place in a therapist's office as a rule, and the therapist is involved talking initially with each parent separately and the child or children separately, and then bringing together the non-custodial parent and the child so that they can talk with each other in a controlled situation with a professional who can help them resolve, clarify, work through any of the things that they need to talk about so that they can move ahead and hopefully have a positive relationship.
I think for me, the biggest difference with the reunification therapy is that the reunification therapy is partly like a reintroduction of the child and the parent because there has been a long absence. The therapeutic visits are still working through issues that need to be discussed, but kind of without that getting to know each other again component, just because there hasn't really in those situations been such an extended separation.
And so with the therapeutic visitation, so say that a parent and children or child have been through the reunification counseling and then they move into the therapeutic visitation. What would be the reason for continuing with therapeutic visitation after this period of reintroduction and the kids are feeling comfortable and stuff?
There wouldn't really be a reason. The kids are feeling comfortable. At that point, we would say that the goal of the therapeutic visit involving the mental health professional had been met and that it was time to move to something like supervised visits.
I'm still fuzzy on reunification counseling and therapeutic visitation. They're distinct from each other. So you couldn't use one.
The reunification really happens when there is a reunification that needs to occur. So it's literally a coming back together. So there's been an extended period of separation, usually, 6 months or more, where the parent has either been completely absent or in rehab, or there's just been a long time of no contact. And it's a chance for that sort of first meeting of the way the parent is now and the child. So it's a reintroduction. The therapeutic visit is when there hasn't been a separation, but there are therapeutic things that need to be discussed.
Thank you. That helps quite a bit. I have a couple of questions about that, about the reunification counseling. Is there any way of telling how long it's going to last or it needs to last, or does it depend on the people involved?
It's totally dependent on the situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Like any kind of therapeutic counseling situation. Confusing sometimes because the court may order reunification counseling and supervised visitation to be at the same time, overlapping. And that doesn't always work because in some cases, until they have the reunification work and are able to discuss some of the concerns or roadblocks in terms of the relationship, it's not a good idea to have them be just in a supervised visitation. So sometimes we need to separate out and clarify that one has to precede the other in order for the real visits to be successful.
And so would the mental health professional be the one guiding and saying to the court, listen, judge, I don't think supervised visits are appropriate yet, or I do?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say one of the roadblocks that we face is that the courts aren't always familiar with the language that we use. So that's tricky sometimes when we have to go back and say, okay, the court order says this, but here's really what needs to happen.
Got it.
But most of the time, the judges are pretty receptive when we do that because everybody's just looking what's best for the child.
Exactly. Well, that's why I'm asking these clarifying questions because, I haven't been entirely clear on the difference between reunification, counseling, and then therapeutic intervention, and then therapeutic visitation. So I want to make sure that I'm asking for what I think is best for the children, but also is, kind of correct and not ask for things that are conflicting necessarily. Okay, so say there's a situation where you have children who are old enough to express themselves, maybe, 7, 8 years old and up. And in that same family, there are little children like 1-year-olds or babies, who maybe haven't seen a parent for months or ever. is it appropriate, one, for all of the children to do the reunification counseling together? And two, what about for the really little ones? I mean, should they be involved in the reunification counseling too? How does that work for little ones?
I would say that it really would depend on each child, because if the older ones have memories that the younger ones don't have, they're going to have different feelings toward the parent, and so we don't necessarily want to poison the feelings of the little ones based on the experiences of the big ones. So in situations like that, I would say don't include the really little ones in reunification, because part of that reunification is the sort of getting to know and, relearning. But if they don't have memories necessarily from their first exposure to the parent, there's not any relearning that needs to happen for them. For the really little ones, I think a supervised visit would probably be just fine to allow them, in a structured setting that's still safe and controlled, exposure to the parent. But then if they have problems with that, certainly, the reunification could go. But I will frequently separate siblings if they have different issues with the non-custodial parent.
And so when do you figure that out? Like during the initial meeting with the kids, or how do you figure out, okay, that we need to go about this in a creative way?
When I'm starting a therapeutic or a reunification visit, what I'll do is meet with the custodial parent and children first. And part of that meeting will be all of them together, and part of it will be just the kids. And then I'll meet, them and talk to them and kind of get their perspective on things and get a feel for where they are with everything. And then I'll meet with the non-custodial parent and explain the structure and the policies and all that. And then we have everybody together.
Did you have anything to add to that, Nell?
Yes, sometimes it's awkward when you have a wide age spread with the children. And what happens frequently is that the non-custodial parent wants to see both kids at the same time. And yet one is really young and the other may be 12 years old. So their needs for interacting with that parent are very different, and their reactions too. So as we all know, younger kids require more hands-on and more focus than the older kids do. And I frequently suggest that they have visit with one child and then with the other separately, so that they can really focus on the child as an individual at their stage of not only development, but their relationship with the parent.
That helps. Thank you for that. So let's throw something into the mix. Let's throw into the mix drug use, substance abuse, and potential domestic violence, that's happened, been directed at one parent. And, a parent has been gone for a long time. So that parent needs reunification counseling with the children. But then there's this added concern about the drug use and domestic violence. How do you contemplate that, when it's part of a case?
We have frequently had court orders that the non-custodial parent who is being supervised must have a drug test every periodic time, whether it's a hair follicle or urine or whatever. They have to prove that they have not been using drugs. And that information goes to the attorneys and to us. So if they tell us, yeah, somebody slipped up, then there is no visit. If it is a matter of alcohol, we have currently 2 people who have to take a breathalyzer test at the beginning of each visit, and it has to blow 00 or they can't have a visit. And knowing that they have to do that, so far we've had all 0 zeros, so they get their visit. In terms of the therapy, again, they have to be chemically free in order to participate in the therapeutic process, be it supervision or reunification, therapeutic supervision, whatever.
Let me ask you this. So I think that a parent who has an issue and maybe is having a hard time kicking the issue might ask, well, why, if, things are being supervised, excuse me, do I need to be chemically free? The children are being protected. They're safe because there's a third party there who's not going to let anything happen. So why do I have to blow a 0-0? Or why do I have to not have pot in my system?
Because that's what the court says. That's the order of the court.
Well, and okay, and Shannon, you said something I didn't quite hear.
I think for me, it comes down to you have to be able to prove that you're going to put the best interests of the child first.
All right, thank you for that. So I think that a fear that a lot of custodial parents have, especially when there's been substance abuse or domestic violence, is that the kids are going to go into reunification counseling with a professional, and then the professional is going to cut the non-custodial parent loose with kids and say, okay, like they're great, everything's good, and they can have unsupervised time. How do you handle that process, and what goes in? What do you consider in making a recommendation that visits shall revert to unsupervised?
So here's the thing about that. We don't make recommendations, period. Our job is simply to provide information. So we can tell the court, we have seen XYZ behaviors that are concerning, or we can tell the court they followed the policies and procedures. We have no evidence at this time to suggest that they would be dangerous to the children. And then the court makes the decision based on that. Generally, what the process looks like, though, to kind of answer your question in a concrete way, is that we would start with, if we're doing the full gamut, we would start with the reunification therapy, which would then move into the therapeutic visits, which would then move into the supervised visits. And then once we're looking at moving into unsupervised time, we do what's called a bookend visit, which, let's say it's a 4-hour visit. The first hour would be supervised. The middle 2 hours would be unsupervised. And the last hour would be supervised again. And that way, there's that supervisor contact that by this time is very familiar with the child and the parent and the interactions between them, and would be able to kind of gauge those interactions after that unsupervised time and see how everybody's doing.
One of the things that is really valuable to the court in making decisions is that at each supervised or therapeutic visitation, there is an observation report that is created by the supervisor. So by the time the family has just supervised visits, the court, through the attorneys, is getting a neutral, objective report of what happened during the visit, what was said, what was done, the reactions of the parents and children involved, and they can then use that as data in writing right in front of them to make determinations about the advisability of terminating the supervision or the need to continue it.
Okay, so do you have recommendations in terms of the ideal frequency of sessions and length of sessions for reunification counseling, or does it just depend on the case?
I like to do at least weekly because it's very difficult to build a relationship only seeing someone once or twice a month. Sometimes more than weekly is hard for people to manage with schedules and that sort of thing. So we usually shoot for weekly.
What about, can reunification counseling work for parents who live out of state? Like live in a different state than their children, or what? Have you had any experience with that?
Yes, we have, but Zoom and HIPAA compliant websites make that possible, although it's not always the easiest, especially if it's a young child.
It is trickier, but definitely possible. We've done Zoom visits, and then we've done where the non-custodial parent will travel to where we are and where the child is, and have like a therapeutic visit on Friday, a supervised visit on Saturday, and then another therapeutic visit on Monday. So they kind of make a long weekend out of it. And it's a lot at once, but it is workable.
Okay. And, I know there's a lot of people who feel hopeless because they feel like their relationship with a child or children is so far gone and that they'll never get it back. I see this especially in cases where there's teenagers involved, and the teenagers are rebelling and starting to assert independence and pushing back against maybe one of the parents who's a little less lenient than the other. Is there hope? Have you seen these relationships be repaired? Should a parent continue to try? Because I have parents who say, hey, my kid is 16, like they're going to be emancipated in a couple of years. Like, I just give up. Like, it's too late.
I believe that we should never, ever give up on our kids. No. And one of the things that we have experienced is that when the courts push, especially a pre-adolescent or an adolescent, into visitations when the child is totally resistant, saying things to the non-custodial parent like, I wish you were dead, you're not my parent, all kinds of nasty things. There comes a point where if the child is so dug in that to push them is just going to dig them in deeper, that I personally feel and have recommended that in those cases, the visitation process, the therapeutic process with the other parent should be put on hold and have that child in the meantime be in a therapeutic relationship with good therapists so that they can work through and understand some of the hostility, anger, hurt that they're feeling, because it's not usually anger. It's just a sense of abandonment and hurt and being deceived and more of that sort of issue. So if we can back off and let that kid work through some of their feelings, then that natural innate tendency in human beings to know your parents, to have some idea of who gave birth to you, that can then come forward so that eventually, maybe not till the kid's 18, 20, 25, then they might on their own seek out that parent.
Yeah.
But if we push them now, we're just going to make them angrier and more impossible.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword. They can dig in and just refuse to budge. The other piece of it, though, is that if the parent says, okay, I get that you don't want to hear from me, I'm going to leave you alone. What happens then is the child doesn't think, oh, that's great, they gave me what I wanted. They end up feeling like, why didn't they love me enough to keep fighting? And so even if we're going to say, okay, we're not going to force contact right now, the non-custodial parent needs to do something, whether it's a text message or a note in the mail or something, to just remind the kid on a regular basis, I'm thinking about you, I love you, I'm here for you no matter what.
It's hard. It makes my heart hurt just thinking about, for both the parent and the child.
It's such a balance. All of parenting is a balance, and we have to maintain that. It's like you always love the child. You may not like what they did, but loving wisely means that you deal with what they did and you invoke consequences for inappropriate behavior, so that, even though the kid yells at you about it and says you're mean and they wish you weren't, their parent, because there's always that balance. But the bottom line, you got to love them no matter what. And you've got to know that when they are there and need you, you will be there for them.
So thank you. And I think that's a great way to move into, the other topic I wanted to touch on, which is, disciplining kids in a way that is not a power struggle. And as we were talking about before we came on air today, this is an issue that applies not just to people who are going through family law stuff, family law cases, but it applies to all parents. I think all parents struggle with this. And so I know that you have some wisdom to share, and I want to soak it in. She's going to be 10 in a couple weeks. and I want to parent in a way that's effective. And I know that's a whole big topic, like we could talk for months about, but any tips or suggestions you have
Yes.
on disciplining in a way that it's not a power struggle? I'm not pushing my kid away, you know?
We call it behavior modification.
Okay.
Sure. What I ended up doing, my daughter was very challenging when she was 10-ish to 14, 15-ish.
My daughter was
she
too,
is
And for
it's a
those of
family
you who
tradition,
don't,
what can I say?
for those of you who don't know, Dr. Shannon is Nell's daughter. Okay, sorry.
Yes, the family is full of intelligent and opinionated women who do not give up easily. And it serves us very well as adults. But Lord, Mama, I'm sorry about when I was a teenager. So
you were mostly awesome.
What ended up working best for us, and that has worked really well for so many of the families that I've worked with, is giving children choices. And I don't mean like the do whatever you want kind of choice. I mean, like, okay, that you just said was disrespectful. Please choose to either say it again respectfully or give up 30 minutes of your screen time tonight. What you want to do is come up with a general list of expectations for your children. Things like be respectful to other people at all times, keep your hands and feet to yourself, do what you're asked when you're asked, do your chores, do your homework, go to bed when you're supposed to, those sorts of things. Then for each one of those expectations, you come up with a logical consequence if that expectation isn't met. The screens were a big thing in my house. That's how they communicate with their friends. My thing is, if you're not respectful when you communicate with me, then you don't need to be communicating with anybody else. So that's a logical consequence.
Yeah.
So the disrespect was met with the loss of screen. And realistically, screen time can be a consequence for just about anything. What's the currency? What's the leverage for your child? I work with one kiddo now who time with her family playing board games is her currency. That is her love language. That's what she wants. And so she has an opportunity with her behavior during the day to earn 30 minutes of game time at night. And so when her parents talk to her, it's please choose, either pick up your toys like I asked or give up our game time tonight. So the language is also really important. It's never pick up your toys like I asked, or I'm going to take away your TV, right? Because then the parent's the bad guy. Then it's a power struggle. It's always please choose, either do what this thing is that I expect of you, or give up, because it's the child's choice. They are giving it up, whatever it is that's the consequence. And so with screen time in our house, screens went off at 8:30 because bedtime was at 9. So if they chose during the day to give up screen time, then instead of turning things off at 8:30, I would walk in at 8 or 8:15 and just hit the power button. I can be sympathetic as a parent and say, I'm so sorry. You remember earlier when you made that choice to give up screens instead of picking up your toys? I can tell you're really not happy with how that choice turned out. I'm so sorry. And it's entirely something they did. But once you give them that choice to either do X or give up Y, the parent is done talking. There's not any more conversation about it. There's no arguing. It is just the consequence of their choice later on.
It's a subtle distinction, but very important. And I think that I've been kind of screwing up because I'm like, do this or that is going to happen.
Well, and
we all do it that way.
That's the natural way, or because I said so, people say, but kids need to have a sense of personal power. They're short, people look up at people, the whole 9 yards. And when we give them a sense of having some control and power, they don't have to fight for it because they have it. My favorite saying is that when it's time for breakfast and You want your kids to have eggs. So you don't say, what do you want for breakfast? You say, how would you like your eggs, scrambled or fried?
Yes.
So they're busy thinking, scrambled, fried. And,
That's great. That's great. I love that because, I feel like I see so many people just in my practice who are adults and they don't take ownership of their choices. And it's somebody else's fault a lot of the time. I'm not saying it's always my clients, it's not, and I'm wondering if this type of parenting style leads to that sort of mentality.
It's interesting because with the economy and society the way it is, we are seeing a lot of adult children now living at home.
Yes.
And because they were coddled as children, they're back in that environment with those same people and feel like they need to be coddled again and are not taking responsibility or offering to do things. And it's creating quite a conflict in a lot of homes. And so it's important, I think, in the very beginning, as Shannon said, that they have a list of things they know what they're responsible to do. And if they aren't doing those things, then there are consequences. A person who is raised in that way feels a sense of control and knows there are consequences and will internalize that as adults in a much more effective and appropriate way.
I love it.
And
I'm
when you
making
give
notes.
kids choices about simple things like, would you like milk or water with your dinner? Or do you want to wear the red sweater or the blue sweater? Or, hey, don't forget you need to shower tonight. Do you want to do that now or do you want to do it after you finish your video game? Like any of the options that you offer them can be options that are acceptable to you. But when they feel like they have choices about smaller things, they don't feel like they need to fight as hard about the big stuff. And then also, when they don't have a choice, you can say, listen, you have choices about a lot of things. This isn't one of them.
I think we talked about this during the last time I chatted with you, and it's just, how people, we model, and I know that I've modeled a lot of my parents' style, in parenting, and my parents are fantastic parents. They were great parents, but a lot of the way they did things was, like Nell said, because I said so. That was it. Like, I didn't have a choice. I didn't feel like I had a voice. It was just do it my way or the highway, or it's because, you live in my house and those are the rules. And when you move out, you could do what you want. And,
That's very common. That's very common. And I think there's been an evolution clearly in the style of parenting all the way back from when in the 60s and 70s, there were no rules. Parents didn't have expectations for their kids. Kids were sort of running wild. There's a really good analogy about rules for kids, especially because kids need rules. So if you imagine that there is a 3-foot wide walkway across a gorge, and it's beautiful to look over the sides and down, and it goes across to the other side, and it's very sturdy and safe. But if you're walking across that bridge that's just perfectly flat, how safe are you going to feel? How free are you going to feel to sort of lean over and look and enjoy the beauty of the gorge below?
I think it's going to be right. Scary.
But if there are guardrails along that bridge, then you're safe and you have the freedom to look over and see the beauty on each side. You can even push the guardrail and lean further. Mm-hmm. But you're safe because those guardrails protect you. Raising children, they have to have rules and expectations because they cannot instinctively put those on themselves. And our job as parents is to lovingly create the limits and the guardrails and sternly but lovingly enforce them.
Kids want to make their parents happy. If you show up for a job on your first day and you say, hey, I'm here for my first day at work, tell me what to do. And your boss says, oh, whatever. initially you're going to be like, this is the greatest job in the world. I can surf the internet and get paid for it. But then within a couple of days, you're going to start wondering, like, when am I going to get fired because I'm not doing what they want me to be doing, but I don't know what they want me to be doing. And it creates a lot of anxiety. If kids don't know what the expectations and limits are, they don't know how to make us happy. That creates a lot of anxiety for them.
So I love that. Thank you for those are great analogies. And so I have one more question for you on related to what you just said, Shannon, and kids wanting to make people happy, because I think a big struggle of people that I see is this issue as adults of living to make other people happy. So how do we balance that in our children so they don't grow up into adults who don't understand the importance, one, of making themselves happy, and two, understand that it's not their job to make somebody else happy?
That's a good question and a very difficult one to answer. I think in very general terms, we need to let our children know that what makes us happy is when they are healthy and happy.
Got it.
And that the best way they can please us is by being authentic and healthy and happy themselves. And it's important, and especially when it comes to divorce situations, if there is one thing that we can do that will serve our children the best in their lives, it's to teach them to speak up when they are uncomfortable. There's definitely a balance here. I had a kiddo once come to my office and tell me that she was very angry at her dad and didn't want to go to his house anymore because when he made her shrimp Alfredo, he left the tails on. I honestly looked at her and I said, that's ridiculous. That doesn't count.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are so many situations where kids are uncomfortable in a situation, whether it's with one of their parents or a teacher or a coach or a friend or a romantic partner, that they're uncomfortable and they don't speak up. And in the divorce world, what happens is then they go home and talk to the other parent that they feel closer to about how they're not comfortable at the other house. And it ends up in litigation when it could have just been a conversation about, hey, it bothers me when you drink. And the other parent can say, okay, I won't drink when you're here anymore. And so if we can teach kids to speak up for themselves and to talk about how they're feeling when they don't feel good, that solves so many problems long term. And it really does give them the capacity to say, I don't like this. Can we talk about it? And that is one of the things that helps them balance being happy themselves, but also being considerate of the feelings of people around them.
And that is so important on so many fronts. First of all, as they grow up, they get used to bringing things into the open to talk about when they're uncomfortable. So then that, as we know, creates healthier relationships as adults. Just last night, I listened to a program by our local network of victim assistance that works with victims of abuse and others. And one of the things that they were talking about was how important it is to urge children to talk and to make it comfortable for them to talk, to let them know that we believe them about what they're saying, so that when maybe something happens that, is a sexual misconduct and the child is the victim, they can speak up about it.
Yeah.
Because so many children are told this is a secret, don't tell anybody, and the whole 9 yards. To be in touch with their feelings and to speak about that is so important. And one of the ways I think that is very helpful in terms of creating that atmosphere and giving children that sense of confidence is that we praise the child, not the product. So that when your child brings you something that they've scribbled on paper, whatever age the child is, we don't say, oh, what a beautiful sunshine, or what a beautiful this. we say, wow, look at that. You picked such great colors. You have a really good eye for colors. Did you enjoy doing that? I bet you had fun doing that. You are very artistic, aren't you? So that we're giving that feedback about who that child is, not what they do. And there was a real change in parenting from the 70s and the early 80s to later on about that, because we used to praise the product, and that created a generation of children who felt that they had to produce something in order to be acceptable.
Wow. Gosh, these are such great thoughts and great ideas. And I know they're things that I'm going to incorporate into my own parenting. I have a lot to learn. I tend to feel like, I'm competent in so many areas of my life. But when it comes to parenting, I really feel like I'm messing up a lot of the time. So it's, my husband says that's not true, but I think it's partly me being a perfectionist. But these ideas are really simple and easy to incorporate.
And I bet you're probably not messing up as much as you think.
Thank you.
As long as they know you love them.
All of us screw up. I teach this stuff, for a living, and I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
But that's an opportunity, because your kids need to see you screw up and then fix it. Because they're going to screw up too, because they're human. If I make a mistake and snap at my son like I did the other day, then I can go back to him and say, dude, I'm sorry. That was not about you. I'm just exhausted. I should not have snapped at you.
Yeah.
And then he says, that's okay, Mom. It's okay. But then when he messes up, he knows what to do. He has a model for how to say, I'm sorry, and for how to fix it. And that's so important. More important, I think, than having been the perfect parent in the beginning.
Because if you are the perfect parent, what expectation does that put on your child?
Totally. Yeah, the same thing, same pressure.
To be the perfect child.
Yeah. Right.
I tried to be the perfect parent.
Well, you did a good job, whatever you did.
They're all fantastic, wonderful, productive, compassionate human beings, and changing the world each in their own way. It was an adventure.
For sure. And, what more could you want? And I think that's what we all want. And so thank you for helping me and helping people, change the world in a better way through the children. There's nothing more important. So I so appreciate you. And can you tell us again how people can find you if they want your help or want to reach out to you? How can they contact you?
Our website is theassurancegroup.org. And within that website, you'll see information about services in Pennsylvania and services in Tennessee. Nell is the services in Pennsylvania part of that, and I am the services in Tennessee.
And we each have a private practice in psychology, as well as doing our work through the assurance group with families in custody situations. So the assurance group grew out of our private practice and our awareness of the need to have someone doing supervision.
Thank you so much. I love talking to you. I appreciate your time. And anybody who feels like, Nell or Shannon might be able to provide some help to them, reach out to them, please. And for anybody out there watching, you guys, just remember to keep on trucking and get out there and command the courtroom. And I'll see you next time.